Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here again this evening for our Citizens Advisory Committee. Thank you to the all the people here with the City of Clovis that are with us this evening for helping us get this agenda item moving. For helping us facilitate the discussion this evening. I'd like to start out by recognizing that the City Clovis Citizens Advisory Committee meetings are open to the public at the physical address listed above. There are numerous ways to participate in the Citizens Advisory Committee meetings. You are able to attend in person. You may participate virtually by joining the WebEx meeting. See the notes. And you may view the meeting, which is webcast and accessed at www.cityofclovis.com/CAC. Members of the public will be able to make verbal comments via WebEx by using the raise hand function or by messaging the host to join the queue to speak. Participants wishing to make a verbal comment via WebEx will need to ensure that they access the meeting with audio transmission capabilities. Now I'd like to officially call the meeting to order. Do we have a flag salute? And Ms. Diane Pierce, are you here this evening? Do not see her. How about Noah Albaz? Can you lead us in the flag salute, please? Thank you very much. In our opening business, I need approval for the minutes from the February 9th, 2022 Citizens Advisory Committee meeting. I'll take a motion for approval. Yes, sir. And a second, please. Thank you. A motion and a second. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. On our regular
Chair,
agenda,
if I may, could we do a quick roll call before we move forward?
after the flag salute, Noah, you're supposed to remind me to take roll call. Yes, can we have roll call, please?
Sure. So at this time, all members of the CAC are present with the exception of Elba Gomez, Kintutu Kalabi, Chris Milton, Jim Veros, Jay Verk, and Blake Zanti.
All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Normally that roll call would have been before our first agenda item. On to our next agenda item. Let's see, regular agenda items are matters of the Citizens Advisory Committee agenda, which are open to public for comments. Members of the public will have an opportunity to comment on each individual item. Public comments will be heard after the presentation of an item and before the committee takes action. Agenda item number 2, consider approval. CAC Resolution 22-02, a resolution of the Citizens Advisory Committee of the City of Clovis authorizing continued use of remote teleconferencing or committee meetings during declared state of emergency in accordance with Government Code Section 54953, AB 361. Can I have a motion for approval, please? Could I have a motion for approval, please? Thank you. Could I have a second? Thank you. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Noah. And we have a first and a second. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. And I'm going to pass, now that we've passed this motion, on to Scott for a few comments.
Yeah, no comments are needed.
Thank you, Scott. I'll get better. Agenda item 3, overview of the city management with a focus on the police department presented by City Clovis staff. I'm going to call on Andy to get us started, please.
All right, good evening. So thanks for coming out for meeting number 3, hard to believe. So tonight we're going to do an overview of how to run a city. And I'm going to try and download 20 years of experience in local government into your heads in the span of hopefully less than an hour and a half. To give you a little bit of background on me, I have been with the city for 16 years, coming up on 16 years, and have been focused on community and economic development for much of that time. Affordable housing, economic development, and neighborhood revitalization. Just this past month, I was promoted to assistant city manager. So that role has really required me in my past roles to understand how the city operates as a whole, because a neighborhood takes the whole city for it to run well. If I turn my head this way, can you still hear me? I feel like you can. Okay. So we have a presentation for you, but before that, we got a number of questions over the last few weeks. Thank you so much for your effort. I think we're up to about 50 to 55 questions that have come in. We have tried to answer many of those via writing, and we've emailed those back to you, and it's taken a team effort from everyone you see up here to make that happen. I really appreciate the effort on both sides of that equation. But the chief has some questions he wanted to answer verbally tonight, so I'm going to turn it over to him to go over a few slides to answer some of those questions, and then we'll get into my presentation.
I'll just stay here. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So I just wanted to thank you guys again for being here and taking the time. I'm going to try to make this quick so I don't eat up Andy's time. But some questions came in. One most recently was, I'll just read the questions and kind of give you guys the answer. And then some of them are going to be based on the presentation last time. Some of the questions that came up, I wanted to put those into slides to present that information to you. So this first question is drones use and cost, and what CAD system do we use, and do we coordinate with the sheriff's department? So the answer for that, we have
Can you
16.
clarify the Cad system, what that means?
Yeah, when I get to that, I'll explain all that. CAD is a computer-aided dispatch system, so it's the software that we use from when you call in the 911. The dispatcher inputs that information into a computer. That computer then shoots it out to the officer in the field and shows up in their car. So that's called a CAD system. So for the drone question, we currently have 16 pilots that are Part 107 trained, which is a FAA training that they go through. Each of those pilots are assigned a Mavic mini drone, which is about a $500 purchase for that drone. And then we have 2 dual enterprise drones, which are about $7,000 each. Those are housed at the police department and shared amongst the officers that are trained to take those out. Those are a little bit different because they actually have a PA system in them. They have lighting, a better camera, a camera that can operate at night. So those are a little bit more high-end drones to use. We also have one very expensive drone that's the M300. It's about $35,000. Has a extremely, I think it's a 25 times zoom camera on it. That was purchased for a program that we're involved in, a drone first responder, DFR program. So we're one of 3 cities in the nation that are part of this program, us, Chula Vista, Redondo Beach. So we did a 90-day trial, found a lot of success in it. It's basically when a call gets dispatched that the drone could be used in, that gets sent, is on scene within a couple minutes. We can go up to 3-mile radius, so it almost covers the entire city with one drone, and gives officers before they get their information. So when they respond to the call, they have real-time information on what's going on. So the problem is we don't have the staffing to staff it, so we can't maintain that long term. And then we also ran into problems with Redondo Beach and Chula Vista don't have 110-degree weather, and they don't have 35-degree temperatures. So we're experiencing challenges that we're trying to overcome. But we have some solutions, and we want to maintain that program. But those are the majority of drones that we have. And then we have a budget line item for drones for $15,000. That helps to replace those drones that are issued to the officers in the field. For the CAD system, we currently have New World, which is Tyler is the company. New World is the software that we use. We have a 10-year contract with them. We're on our 8th year currently, so we have 2 years left. And we are exploring right now. The Sheriff's Department recently moved to a different computer software, Mark 3043. So basically, Fresno PD has its own CAD system, the Sheriff's Department, and the Clovis Police Department. The Sheriff's Department supports all the smaller cities within the county on their CAD system. So we're exploring if that would be something that could work for us. It would make financial sense. It'd make some hardware sense, but will it work for our needs is kind of what we're exploring right now. So we're looking at that for in 2 years. We potentially could make a switch or renew our contract with New World. So the next question was, what is the increase in calls for service at hotels annually? He's going to click that for me. So this just looks over the last 3 years, and we had in this 3-year period, I think in 2019, we had about 3 new hotels come online. I'm not saying those 3 hotels are what created that spike. I think the spike was probably due to COVID, but it continued in 21. So I'm not sure that's why it's continuing. But our calls for service in the last 3 years have increased about 234%. So that's the answer for that question. The next question, I think, was from one committee person, and the next 3 questions, actually. So the first one is, do we really need 32 officers? And then how many of these positions would be better staffed by a community service officer or mental health professionals? So a simple answer would be yes, we need 32 more officers. We actually probably need more than that. 16 in patrol, 16 to backfill is what we're looking at. And the 16 to backfill would be those positions I talked about that we vacated. The 16 in patrol, the actual staffing study recommended 18 to 22. So 16 sworn, and then additional 8 community service officers would supplement those officers in patrol. So some of those are actual civilian positions. And then mental health professionals, we currently have 2 that are funded by Fresno County Behavioral Health that are funded through the state to the county. And then they're housed at our police department. And they actually have office space in our department and respond out, I'd say on average, probably 75 calls a month with our officers for people that are in mental health crisis. And they do an amazing job. And then they actually go out and do follow-up and respond to calls on their own. So that's that question. Yeah, they're available pretty much 24/7. This next one, can citations for traffic violations / speeding be automated? I'd say no. It really comes down to, it's a letter of law, spirit of law, black and white. When we pull people over, we're not just writing tickets all the time. Sometimes it's education, sometimes it's a warning. There's a lot that goes into it. I guess a good example would be, we couldn't just put out a camera and catch people for speeding and send citations in the mail. Wouldn't be very good transparency. I think it would be a little overreach from the government, probably. We would all have a little bit of pushback. For speeding citations, a good example, the speed limit in town, let's say it's 35 on Sunnyside and you're driving along at 35. Maybe at 3 in the morning when nobody's on the road, you're doing 45 miles an hour. The basic speed law says as long as it's safe for conditions, you can actually exceed the speed limit. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can do it. I can also cite you for doing 25 and a 35 if you're doing 35 and a 35. I could probably issue a citation if it's foggy, if it's raining, if there's a lot of traffic out, the conditions were not safe for that speed. So I guess to answer this question is there's a lot more that goes into traffic enforcement that really can't be automated. So really needs officers out there engaging the public and educating them to issue citations. So, and the next one, what innovations in policing am I recommending? What policies or practices not working well would I reform? And what do I envision to do differently or better? I think we have an amazing city, an amazing police department. I think what we've been doing for the last 25, 30 years is right on par what we should be doing. We have a great culture as a city, as a department, and honestly, it'd be stupid to change it. So what I'm asking for is the people to allow me to continue to do things that we've done in the past. And an example of that is I've shared with you all the things that we're cutting out, that we're not doing anymore. So the book that you guys picked up, if you did on the way in, is a report to the community. If you haven't read that, it was online on the website for the CAC. I would recommend going through and reading that because it really lays out all the things that we're doing, all the innovative things that we're doing to engage the community. And that report is based on the 21st Century Policing Commission. Back in 2015, under President Obama, they established this commission to recommend what are best practices for policing. So that report kind of judges us against what this committee recommended. I want to bring George Rodriguez up real quick, just to kind of spin off this of the things that we're doing that aren't just using sworn officers. We're using civilian staff. George is actually a civilian police manager, and he fills the role of what a police captain used to do in our department probably 15 years ago. I think George took over. So George oversees animal services, youth services, our graffiti abatement, our diversion program, a number of things. I'll let him explain all that, but just how innovative our department is to transition and not always just rely on sworn officers.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you to the committee member for asking the question on innovation. As Chief was mentioning, we've done a lot of innovative things over the years, and I'd like to review some of those things with you here today. It really started under Chief Maskovich back in the late 80s. Chief Maskovich had a philosophy that, no problem was too big or too small for the Clovis Police Department to handle. So it didn't matter if we got a call for service for, a paper bag on somebody's lawn, or if it was a major crime scene where maybe there was a double homicide and our department needed to, go across the country to try and catch somebody who's committed a horrendous crime. Again, no problem was too big or too small. He also implemented the idea that that everybody in our department could contribute to solving problems. Didn't matter if you were the chief of police or if you were a part-time clerk. Everybody could contribute. Everybody had, an opinion, and anybody can have a good idea. So he encouraged innovation within our department through all of our staff, which was really appreciated, because then you saw the department kind of flourish and people become creative in their respective jobs to come up with innovative ways of doing things. So some of you may remember Captain Doug Taylor. So Captain Doug Taylor took the idea of innovation and ran with it. In the early 90s, he had the idea of developing a juvenile diversion program. So he thought that it was better for our city to keep our kids here locally and hold them accountable in our city rather than refer them to the formal juvenile justice system, Fresno County Juvenile Probation. So he met with the chief probation officer to propose this idea, and the chief probation officer did not like it and would not allow him to do it. Well, if anybody knows Doug Taylor, he was pretty persistent, and he didn't take no for an answer and met with the juvenile court judge. Juvenile court judge did not see any problem with Clovis in implementing a juvenile diversion program and handling our kids here and holding them accountable. So he implemented the program and hired a diversion hearing officer who started meeting with kids and meeting with parents and holding kids accountable here in Clovis. Then Chief Maskovich came behind that and had the idea of pairing that with a juvenile counselor. So they designed a juvenile counselor position to go into youth services, and they advertised for the position, and they hired a psychiatric nurse to work for the police department. She came on board, provided supportive counseling, stayed with the department for a couple of years, and then decided to move on. So they went out again and advertised the position. And this time they hired a licensed clinical social worker, which was me. So I came on board and provided individual and family therapy, and all these services are free of charge to our community. So I did individual family therapy and provided a parent support group once a week. Every Thursday night, 15 years, I was at our police department meeting with parents and trying to help them to deal with the problems that their kids had. So that was the diversion side of things. But there were other programs that were going on at the same time that maybe some of you have heard about. So we had the DARE program in our youth services division. DARE program was funded or was staffed by 2 community service officers. You may remember Officer Turney or Daryl Turney. He's very popular in our community and connected with a lot of kids and parents. And so he, along with the other community service officer, would teach DARE to all of our 6th grade students in our community, all the ones that lived in the city limits of Clovis and attended Clovis Unified Schools. Then we had a stranger danger program, and that was taught by a retired sergeant from another department. And he taught stranger danger to kindergarten through 3rd grade and worked very well with the Clovis Unified School District. We also had 2 police officers assigned to youth services. And those police officers were responsible for coordinating and implementing a number of programs and services. Some of you may remember the PAL program, which is a Police Activities League. So we're very well known around here for having good sports activities and being very competitive. Well, not all kids fit into that model. Our department felt like there needed to be another avenue for some kids to participate in sports activities. So these 2 police officers would coordinate basketball tournaments, flag football tournaments, kickball, do barbecues, and we even had boxing for a period of time. It was right across the street from the police department. Official size ring, everything. These kids would learn how to box and then go participate in tournaments. Those 2 police officers were also responsible for overseeing our Police Explorer program. The Police Explorer program are kids that were interested in law enforcement and received training on different scenarios, and then would go out to events throughout the state and compete against other Explorer posts. So they would coordinate that. You might remember some of the Explorers maybe doing parking details for Clovis Unified, or at the rodeo grounds directing traffic and parking cars, or helping people walk across the street. They were very active in our community. Those police officers also provide a very vital role to our diversion program, because when parents needed some additional support and kids were acting out, maybe being defiant, not going to school, arguing, yelling, those kinds of things, they would call us youth services, and we'd send out one of those 2 police officers to encourage them to have better behavior, sometimes giving them a ride to school, to just support the parental authority. And keep in mind, they would not go in uniform. They were in plain clothes. So their role wasn't to go and arrest kids. Their goal was to encourage these kids to respect their parents, respect the rules, and behave better. So that was a critical part of our program. Then we had one other program, and it was a domestic violence intervention program. So we assigned a community service officer to provide early intervention for domestic violence victims and help them to develop a safety plan and connect them with some of the resources at the Marjorie Mason Center. This community service officer also provided a weekly support group for domestic violence victims. There was one other kind of really innovative thing that happened in our department. I spoke earlier about, I've been here about 15 years, and that was the first part of my career. I've been here, 27 years. First 15 or so was doing the individual and family therapy. The last half of my career has been part of the command staff with Chief Fleming and Chief Davis and Chief Baskell before that. So, you know, I've never heard of a mental health professional or a clinical social worker being part of a police command staff. And I called Chief Davis and I said, you know, what were you thinking, right? Because it's so unusual. And her comments were that, you know, she had all the police perspective, you know, with her captains and lieutenants in the room, and she wanted a different perspective to be added to the room. She also said that she felt like I represented the non-sworn staff and that they needed a voice at that table. And she said that I also represented the community because I wasn't a police officer in that room. And she said it was critical for you to be in that room. She took a big risk because that was very unusual. And I'm sure there were some people back then that didn't agree with that decision. And there might be some people today that still don't agree with that decision, but that's okay. So I talked about I'll go back to the youth services program. And, you know, all those programs I talked about are gone. Chief referred to them in his previous presentations about that. We had to cut them. They're gone. As much as I think those are so important, and they are important, and they helped families, this chief and the previous chief had to make those cuts and make that tough decision to be able to staff patrol to keep our citizens safe from people who decide to commit crime. So my hope is someday we'll be able to get those back. So then I'll just repeat some of what the chief has said before. You know, the choice for all of you is, you know, does our police department remain innovative and have a prevention focus? Or do we, you know, become more reactive to crime as it's committed in our community? So thank you for listening. Thank you, Chief, for letting me talk.
And people do question still today, why is he in that room? But Chief Davis, it was honestly a unique, very different thought. And George is so valuable in that room today. The history, he's like the only one that was in the original command staff with Chief Davis. So a lot of history, a different perspective. It's nice because we all think a certain way. We're very, you know, controlling, atypical. We have this certain focus, and George kind of brings us back home. So the next slide, Andy, if you can hit that. So last week, somebody brought up, or 2 weeks ago, per capita, can we compare to cities a little bit more closer to our size? And we were shooting for 5%, but that was a little bit too small. So we did 30,000 above and 30,000 below. And this is what it worked out to. My admin assistant actually called every one of these departments and got their current staffing as well as their budgets. The next slide will show the budgets for each of these departments and how that breaks down per population. So basically taking the budget of the police department and dividing it by population, and that's the cost per citizen. It just kind of shows you where we fall in that. Somebody asked, one of the questions was per capita over the last 15 years. Oh, I'm sorry. Sure. While you're looking at that, because I don't want to. I will point out the very bottom one is interesting because their staff for 150 something officers in Visalia. They have 2 tax measures that they pass, one for I think capital and equipment, and then one for staffing. And I just question on how that number is so low, but I don't know if it just doesn't take into account, maybe that's general fund dollars versus the tax revenue is not added into that. But that's what they provided us, so that's what we put up because it came directly from them. So the next question came in from somebody asking if we could look at per capita over the last 15 years. So this graph just represents 15 years and the per capita during that time. You can kind of see where we hit our peak in '08, and then obviously the recession hit and we fell, and we've really just never recovered from that point on. The next one, just a graph of our sworn officers versus population, just to kind of show you that as the city continues to grow. This question came in, and the question was, how many have left versus retired? Maybe look at the past 5 years. So this is the past 5 years. We average, if you look at this chart, it looks like 5 to 7 retirements normally in the past 5 years, and then last year was just a great resignation, I guess, for all professions kind of hit us as well, and we had 14 left during that time. So this shows retired, resigned, as well as if they didn't make the training program. I will tell you, as of 2022, I only knew of one retirement that was going to occur in September. One of my lieutenants, I think I spoke about that last time. 2 weeks later, I have a couple days ago, I had an officer come in and put in 2 weeks notice that's going to choose to go into another line of work. And then we had 2 people that didn't make our training program. So I was hoping for 1 retirement this year, and we've already got 4 that is in 2022. So we're almost at our average for our 5-year average. So last week, one of the questions was, how much will it cost to hire the staff needed when accounted for? I think the chair, you said, just tell us what you need. Be brutally honest, and what's it going to cost? Somebody else said, hey, what's it going to cost? So in my original presentation, this is the actual slide that I presented to council, and it said, hey, I need 32 officers today. I need over the next 5 years another 18 to make 50. 8 community service officers, 5 dispatchers, and 2 animal control officers. The next slide showed that was the cost that I presented at that time, was 9.2. And I did mention during that presentation that didn't take into account equipment cost, clerical staff, and this was strictly the officers, the CSOs, animal control, and the dispatchers. So I went back and broke it down in the next slide, and this is truly for that 9.2 what that was. It was all step 1 for the officers, and that broke down to come to 9.2. So I'm going to tell you what it's really going to cost and what we really need, because you wanted me to be really honest. So this breaks it down further. I think you guys already have this slides when you came in. So the first category talks about, that's what an officer costs at the first, for a step 5, so topped out officer, with roll-ups, benefits, and everything is $182,000. So you take that down, that's for every position. The next one is that first year for an officer to outfit them with a body cam, a firearm, a duty belt, a vest, all the equipment that goes with them is $19,000. Vehicle cost associated with that officer, and that just goes through for everybody. So we just broke it down for you guys so you know exactly what that would cost. And this is based on the 50. If 5 years from now, if we had 50 officers, if we had the 8 CSOs, the 5 dispatchers, the 2 animal control, the clerical staff, and the jail to support that. The next slide shows what that total is. Annual cost annually for the salaries is about 13 million, and the equipment is about 7.8, which is a one-time. Most of our equipment, duty belts, firearms, vehicles, we're getting about 10 years out of our vehicles. So all of that 7.8, you can really put that over a 10-year period of time. So an annual cost for equipment is about 780,000 is kind of what we came up with. So that's all I have. I think that's most of the questions that came up last time, and then most of the questions that came in through the email that I wanted to cover with you guys. So if there's more for the next meeting that you want to shoot an email, and we'll try to incorporate that and bring it up, or I can answer a few questions right now as well.
Okay, it's working today. One of the questions was the contract for your officers. But not on purpose, did you? Jake Ulam. My question is about this. The contract for your officers ends soon. There's going to be like union negotiations. How does that influence this number, if at all?
This is based on our current contract that ends in July or June 30th. So the top step officer rate is based on that. So that 182,000 is based on a top step 5 officer in that contract with all the benefits associated with it. So any pending negotiations, whatever that would be over the next contract, does not factor into this at all. Any other questions or things I can follow up on?
Yeah, it's a good time for questions on any of that we've just been presented. If anybody of our members here have any questions or anything.
Perfect. I didn't take up too much of Andy's time.
The chief can take all the time he wants. He carries a gun. Switch over. Okay, so before I get into my presentation, I wanted to go over kind of the why we're here. So John Holt, our city manager, has tasked me with coordinating a lot of this effort and being an interface between you and staff and doing some of the behind the scenes work. So our first part of the Citizens Advisory Committee, as tasked by council, was to review, and that was the services of the city police, Clovis Police Department, existing staffing and funding. And so Kurt has done a lot of that work this last meeting and some tonight, and we'll get into that a little bit more today, as well as spending and staffing patterns within the police department over the past 15 years, which we'll for sure get into that today or next meeting. I want to give you a heads up. There's a lot of content tonight. We may not get to everything, and that's okay. We have another meeting to do what we call the review portion of this effort. Then the next part really shifts to you as a committee, is the evaluation. What level of resources are needed for Clovis to remain the safest city in the valley? And that's a charge from the city council for this committee. And then to report recommendations to city council, spending and staffing in the police department, levels of service, level of resources needed, and how levels of service could be maintained or improved going forward. So that is the charge. I just wanted to reiterate that for everyone. And that has been the whole effort of what we're trying to do. So the first 4 meetings, the first meeting was kind of a logistics and get to know you. The next meeting was the police chief telling you his perspective on what he is up against. And then we're also going to be providing you with more information. It's really kind of an information dump and download to provide you an education or a foundation to be able to move forward and start thinking this through as council has asked you. So before I move on to my presentation, are there any questions on that? Are we good? Okay. All right, we already did that. All right, so my presentation, which is going to be supported by others up here. First off, I want to do a little introduction. So new to the room is Shauna Halterman. Shauna is our General Services Director, and she oversees everything from transit to the senior center, to the recreation center, to risk management / personnel, facilities maintenance and management, purchasing. Keep going, Shauna. Come on. There's got to be something more. Yeah. So there are some slides in here regarding human resources and negotiations and those kinds of things. And she has graciously come tonight to be able to talk about those and answer any questions. And I believe you already met Jay, the chief of course, John Holt, and our city attorney. And I'd like to thank Carrie Cha, city clerk, which has been doing double city clerk duties. And then behind the counter there hiding is Chris. He's our IT support. So this has been a big effort, and there's more people back at City Hall like Rebecca out front that have been making it happen. So thank you. But tonight we're going to get into City Management 101. So you didn't realize you were coming to a school, but you are. Well, it is a school technically, CHSU. And I've been in local government for 20 years now. Some at the county of Fresno, the balance at the city of Clovis. And it's taken me that long to kind of figure out how to manage a city and what really matters. So I'm going to try and encapsulate how the nuts and bolts of city management works from a perspective of financials, but it all interconnects. We're going to get into that. It interconnects with land use, revenues, how the budget works, And then we'll get into the police department's history, the 15 years of expenditures and staffing levels. And then we already went over the CAC goal. So a little bit of demographics for you guys on Clovis. So I'm the city's economic development guy. I'm the sales guy. Greg knows this. I can't get out of here without telling you about how great Clovis is. So we're 110 years old as of February 12th, this last week. And our median household income is bumping up against 80,000, which is really good. In the county, we're probably in the low 40s on average. So Clovis is about double of our county. Our education levels are also exceptional. 90% of our residents have a high school diploma or higher, and about 25 to 30% have a college degree. And that's of persons over the age of 25. Our total payroll of every business, nonprofit, employer in town is $1.37 billion. I track that as often as I can to see how our economy is growing. So we have a sizable economy here in Clovis. We have about 35,000 jobs within the city of Clovis. That's not residents that just have jobs, but actual jobs at businesses in Clovis. And we're seeing that grow, but it did drop during the pandemic. We were at about 37,000. That was our peak in 2019. We've dropped down to like 34.5. We're back up to 35. We're starting to come back. So that is good news. One thing you'll hear from governments, cities especially, is what is a jobs housing balance ratio of your community? And that is a measure of how many rooftops do you have for every job? And we like to have one job for every rooftop. Makes you not be a bedroom community, allows you to be a full service community. We're at 0.81. The highest we've been is 0.9. We've been as low as 0.55. So when the chief talks about the tough times in 2009, 10, that's when we dropped down that low, when jobs really fell off a cliff. We've come a long ways, but the pandemic didn't help that number. We had 800 new business starts in the last year here in Clovis. It's pretty average for us. Even during the pandemic, that stayed pretty strong. We were encouraged by that. People were starting their small businesses and getting them going. Our unemployment rate is 3.8%. It's right at about national averages. We're usually slightly above or below. That is significantly less than the rest of the county. Like Fresno is probably around 6 to 7% right now. And we're pretty proud of that, but that speaks to the community that we have here. We're 25 square miles. We're one of the fastest cities growing in the state. That's slowing down a bit. But I believe last year, we were the second fastest growing city in the state of populations over 100,000. So the population growth is hard to keep up with relative to services, but it is an opportunity in other ways. Our population is about 121,000. That number is a little dated because the state hasn't updated through December yet. That'll happen in May. I'm guessing we'll be at 123, 124, somewhere in there. All right, so now we're getting into how city management works. So the general plan is the foundational document for the city. It controls pretty much everything. And in the general plan, it's broken down into a wide variety of categories, but it tells you from a very simplistic view of what can you build where in a community and what are the policies related to that use. So can you build a medical school on that corner? Can you build a Target on that corner? Can you build houses? Can they be apartments? Can they be single family? Can they be attached row housing? All those things are built out. There's also sections in there to address economics, public safety. They talk about open space, parks. So this is a foundational policy document for the city. Usually they're updated about every 10 years. The last time ours was 2014. And they can take some time to update. So we're actually just beginning to update our document now in anticipation of having an updated document by the mid-2020s. It's a huge effort. It's not cheap, but it's what has made Clovis Clovis in many ways. As much as our public safety is critical to make Clovis Clovis, our land use planning and that thought into who we want to become over the next 10 or 15 years is critical. The general plan focuses on public safety. And my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, so I'm going to get closer. There we go. Yeah, I know. That was on purpose. So goal 6 under the public facilities element is focused on safety. So that is thought through at a very high level. There's not a detailed plan in the general plan, and is considered as we're making land use decisions. The planning area that our general plan currently addresses is up here on the screen. so I'm going to try this. There we go. It's a little laggy. All right. So we are sitting right here at CHSU. So our plan area goes all the way out to Academy, all the way out to up to Copper, and then over to Willow Avenue, and then basically follows the Gould Canal on the south / Ashland. All right, somewhere in there. So this is the area that the land use planners were looking at in developing our general plan. Now within that, we started thinking about what's our growth pattern for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So again, I'm going to highlight on here. We are sitting, just for perspective, wait a minute. I lost it. There it is. We are sitting right here. We have 3 growth areas in the community. This area, which was referred to as Northwest on the previous slide, is now called Heritage Grove, and we're beginning to see development in that area. Out here, we don't have a fancy name for it yet, but we'll come up with one, I'm sure. This is the Northeast growth area. No development has happened out here. And then down south is Loma Vista. This is where Clovis East High School, Reagan Educational Center is. And this is about 70% built out, and we're getting commercial out here. So that's the current general plan. All those colors mean a different land use. It's a land use designation. And it tells you, like I said, what you can build. Residential, commercial, industrial, various densities of those things, mostly on the residential side. Describe control. Yeah, so that leads into my next slide. So the city has a sphere of influence that shows where we have kind of rights to annex property into the city to provide services to, whether it's police, fire, water, sewer, commercial, trash pickup, those kinds of things. And our current sphere of influence is highlighted on this map as the black line, although I want to highlight a few things with this. It goes all the way around. So there's out of that area that we first started with, this is all the area that right now we have rights to. But over the last few years, we've recently added a couple of areas to our sphere in red. So up here in Heritage Grove, we added this area, which I believe is out to the Sunnyside alignment. Yeah, all right. And then we added 1,000 acres out in the Northeast growth area. All right. So in order to add to our sphere of influence, we have to basically negotiate with the County of Fresno because that was their property before. We have to negotiate with them a tax sharing agreement. We have to negotiate the transition of those lands and services going forward. And we have to go through a process with the Local Agency Formation Commission. That's a third-party group in Fresno County. Every county has one to determine boundaries of cities and other agencies. So going through that process, we also have to do a master service review. So this is on top of the general plan that we have to go in and develop a lengthy document to show that we can serve that area adequately. We have a plan in place to do so. Starts with the general plan. We'll get into some others in a few slides. But that master service review is reviewed by LAFCO and the County of Fresno, and that approval happens so we can increase our sphere of influence that allows annexations to occur. Annexations are what allow you to develop a property in the city of Clovis. It becomes within the city limits. It is now Kurt's job to go out there and take care of that property if there's a call for service. It is not a sheriff's job anymore. All right, let me go back. So it's harder to see on this, but an annexation would be like an area just to the east of, Clovis East High School that gets brought in within our sphere to allow for like Lennar to develop in that area, as an example. So they generally are smaller and they're development based. A developer comes in, wants to build houses or an industrial park or a new Costco, which I'm all in on. I love Costco. It costs me too much though. And it allows that development to occur to city standards in the general plan. So at the end of all this, we have property within the city limits, which means it's been annexed. We now have zoning that the general plan has designated. We have a project come in And we know that we have to serve that project. So based on the general plan and the area that we are developing, we had developed by service, master service plans. So everything that you use, water, sewer, trash, public safety, everything has a master service plan of some type that gets developed by city staff. It gets adopted by council. So it decides how big the pipes need to be in order to serve an area, how dense it is for water. How much water do we need to procure? How big does the sewer plant need to be? How does that flow through the community? How does recycled water play into this? What's our ratios for this service or that service? So those are all developed. They're lengthy documents that are done and adopted by city council. And then the departments from those also take and develop their own plans. So the chief provided the report to the community and develops goals on how they want to serve an area. So at a staff level, we know based on the general plan what's coming. We know what we need in order to build out that area and to provide the services that's expected of the community based on those master service plans. And the departments that are in operations are ready to provide that service. We also have to work with partners on that. So Clovis Unified didn't just build Clovis East High School. They built it in partnership with the city. We developed a land use plan. We said, we think we're going to have 30,000 more people in this area. And they went and built that high school first. They had that much confidence and trust in the city of Clovis that that development would occur. They did the same thing with Clovis North. That's up near Heritage Grove. They're working on a new high school down to the south of us right now. We also have other agencies that serve our community, such as the Fresno Metropolitan Flood Control District. They're the ones that actually take care of stormwater. They have a master plan, just like I described. They tell you, here's the angles, here's how much storage capacity we need to make sure our community doesn't flood, and that gets overlaid based on our general plan. So none of this is cheap, all right? So based on that, we have a master service plan. We know what's going to happen with every area, and we can calculate how much each unit, or for this conversation, let's just say a house, is going to cost in order to provide those infrastructure services across the community. Every line on that little chart, this isn't meant to be read. If you want to read it, then we can go out to coffee and you'll need the caffeine. But everything from streets to sewer to water to recycled water to parks, fire impact fee, every left turn lane pocket, special flood control areas, all kinds of things are included in this. Our fees per unit are about $30,000. That doesn't include Clovis Unified impact fees. Doesn't include regional impact fees. So this is generally Clovis specific. So I wanted to highlight for you, police has an impact fee of $759 right now per unit, per home. Now, when we assess commercial, like for example, they calculate what the load on the community will be for a commercial project and convert it into units. So they pay their fair share as well. That goes into an account that is held to pay for infrastructure. So it's either to pay for bonds or to pay for that street, to pay for that pipe. And that's how we finance those improvements that were in the master plans. All right. Apparently I'm doing something distracting people. All right, so the police impact fee generates about $600,000 per year. It can only be spent on capital improvements. Can't be spent on hiring officers. It can't be spent on bullets or replacement of kind of typical equipment. It has to be things that are related to the growth of that property, because that developer is saying, well, I'll pay that fee because my project is making the impact, but it has to pay for that impact. Go ahead and go to the next slide. No, it's one time. So that's one-time money that comes in based on that development. But we get about 600 grand a year. Now, I will say historically that fee has been less. It was recently increased, but maybe 2 years ago. It was $100, it went up. And those fees aren't calculated in a vacuum. We take the actual cost We look at how many units we think we're going to do and basically do an engineering or financial analysis to come up with a fee that we can go and say, this is the cost of providing that service. And they get updated, hopefully annually, that's our goal, but not always. So we have a complete project. You may recognize that, House of Juju, best burger in town in my opinion. So my question when I came into taking on economic development is how much does that project produce revenue-wise? Right? We know that it paid one-time expenses, all kinds of impact fees, one time into various accounts, whether it was water, sewer, trash, parks, police, fire. But what's it doing going on from here? So it took all that work, all those documents, all those plans, all that calculation to get to the point where someone can come in, pull a building permit, get the land use entitlements, basically permission to build, and then build their building. So it's years of effort to get to this point development-wise. So we have operating revenues off of that building, and it's different on whether it's a home or a commercial building and the type of commercial building, and it varies widely. But here's our operating revenues, and this is very general, but it starts with sales tax, property tax, business license tax, transit occupancy tax, enterprise fees, and assessment districts. So some of these are general fund revenues. Some of them are dedicated for a certain purpose. There's a list here on the slide to the right that goes over how much. So for instance, currently our property taxes that are discretionary, which means general fund, is about 30 million. Other taxes, which include sales tax and some other things, is 34. And we'll get into much more detail on this later. And then it goes down the list. On the ratio here of our revenues of operating funds, only about 24% are really discretionary general fund. Everything else is we are told what it has to do. So we have a pretty small slice to work with as a city manager trying to make it work as a finance director. So first off, sales tax. This is the one that you feel when you go into Costco to buy the TV. All right. So here's a graph here. It shows you kind of our spread of where revenue comes from in the community. And it shows you our projections and current budget, which is 25.6 million. For every $1 spent, the city of Clovis receives 1 cent, but you pay about 8 cents in sales tax. The other seven pennies pretty much go to the state. Am I about right on that, Jay? Sales tax goes to the state. Property tax. So for property tax, we have two sources that we kind of put in the property tax bucket. One is just property tax, and one is a VLF, vehicle license fee in lieu, which it's kind of weird how the state of California does it, but they split up our property tax. So combined, we're at about 30 million. For every $1 of property tax you pay, the city of Clovis gets 13 cents. And that's a rate that's set pretty much in stone by a proposition back in the 1970s, Prop 13. And we can't change that rate. So when you pay your property tax bill in April, if you pay it yourself, 13% is coming to the city. Other taxes. Other taxes include transit occupancy taxes. That's the hotel tax that you pay. Like when you go to any community, the hotel room that was supposed to be $200 costs you $260. We have a 10% hotel occupancy tax here that produces $2 to $2.5 million a year, and it's been growing healthy. We also have a card room in town that produces about $1 million. That's a 500 club. And then we have real estate transfer fees, which is a real small amount of money that comes into that account. Okay, so the previous items are what make up the majority of the city's general fund revenue stream. So that building I showed you, it produces property tax and sales tax. It doesn't produce hotel tax. It doesn't produce real estate transfer tax, really. I guess it could if it's sold. And it does pay a business license fee. That's another small line item in there. What does our business license fees produce annually? Couple million? Okay, couple $1 million. And that's all general fund discretionary revenues. Over the last 20-ish years, the city council has set up other things that the state of California allows to raise revenue to offset some of those Prop 13 impacts, like a community facility district. We established one in 2004, and it only applies to new residential units within the city of Clovis. So if you built a house after 2004, you pay a little bit more on your property tax bill into what's called the CFD. You might just say CFD on it, or Clovis Facility District. The current rates are $265 for residential and $229, and it's to pay for services for police and fire in newly developed areas. It's split on revenues between fire and the police department based on a nexus study that was done in 2004, and overall produces 2.17 million. So that is essentially general fund revenue, but it has to go to police and fire. We can't do anything else with it, but it's become a growing resource as we have more homes come into the community. The other are landscape maintenance districts, and these are widely used. So this pays for a lot of landscaping in town, about 70%, and produces 5.1 million. This also would show up on your property tax bill. The remainder of landscaping in town is picked up by the general fund, and the average fee per parcel in the zone is 160, although that varies widely based on where you're at in the community and when you were brought in. The only way you can adjust this fee is if you do a vote, and then there's some of them have CPI increases. New developments are added into a district. So as a project comes in, they have to pay into the fee. So those are focus funds, but it relieves pressure on the general fund to take care of critical needs. Another source of revenue for the city that comes in off of a building is enterprise. So enterprise is really the business end of the city where we are charging a fee for service. I think it's come up in a few questions. Like, for instance, I see my water bill go up. Why can't one of those other fund fees go up, like the general fund, the sales tax, or what have you? Well, the state allows us to operate our water, sewer, trash, those as a business, and we can pass along the actual cost to the users. We have to do a study, and it actually has to go to a vote, but it produces $77 million for the city. We cannot use those on police and fire, parks. It has to be for that service that it's being billed for. So on this pie graph right here, I'm going to highlight a few things. The city budget. There we go. This is enterprise, the yellow. This down here is probably mostly grants. This down here is the general fund revenue. And then we have internal service charges. Those are charges that come through from other departments to help fund, like the maintenance shop. So it's not exactly general fund revenue. All right, so I'm going to take a pause. I have 3 kids, just for letting you guys all know. And sometimes I overwhelm them. It's a picture of my boys up at about 8,000 feet. And if you look closely, I do this right. Maybe it's not going to do it. Those are my sons collapsed on the trail. So I want to pause and see if there's any questions. Questions can happen later too if you think of one, but just because we're going to kind of move into a different area after this, kind of the land use and monetization of land use and where our revenues really come from as a city. So, any questions? Yeah.
Again, please start with your name.
As soon as I can get the green button, here we go. This is Drew Mosier. Andy, forgive me, I followed as much of that as I could, but it gets pretty detailed. It sounds like we have a difference between certain revenues that are one-time revenues and then some that are renewable annually, certain fees, et cetera. And I understand the enterprise fees are, I think as you put it, things you can bill directly for services. but the police department, I don't think is funded out of the enterprise money, if I understand that correctly. Do we know how much of the police department budget is funded off of these one-time property-related, growth-related income streams as opposed to renewable or annual income streams?
Yeah, they're all ongoing with the exception of the impact fees, which vary based on development. So every year, we get sales tax, we get property tax. That's an annual or everyday payment that our residents are making. The revenues that are one time, but generally happen every year, is based on a development occurring. So when that house is built, it pays its fee one time, it goes into an account, and that supports the police department. The community facility district that I talked about, that's also every year that's paid in as a property tax, essentially. That's how it feels to a resident.
So I think it's been explained to me in the past that some of the struggle we have with the police department funding is there's a lag sometimes between how much growth is happening in the city and when we can expect to collect the revenue that's associated with that growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you pointed out early in the presentation that Clovis is growing really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct in assuming that growth that quickly puts additional stress then on the police department?
I would say yes. The lag principally is within property tax revenues. When you build a new unit, by the time the city receives the property tax share for that property, can be a year to 18 months before we see a dime. So we're having to serve it for that period of time. So that's definitely a lag. We try to account for that in some of our forecasting and for budgeting purposes, but it creates a gap. It's just how the revenue streams work with the state and the county. Retail sales tax is not immediate, but it's closer. I think that's about 6 months behind, right, Jay? Yep. When it's actually received at the business and then remitted to the state by the time it gets to us. And everything has a lag to some degree, but some are more than others. And then let me get Rachel on the,
Hi, can you hear me?
yes.
So I think my question might sort of dovetail with the one that was just asked, but I was curious about the master service plan and how far you might go in planning for services that are needed by new developments that if the master service plan, I think you said is good for it's updated every 10 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the general plan is generally updated every 10 years. It's the only times I can use general in the same sentence.
Okay.
The master service plans are subsequently updated once that is updated. It can vary,
I see.
but the master service plans are for a longer time period than just 10 years. They can run longer and show plans for longer than that time period because the general plan usually has detailed growth plans for about 20.
I see. So maybe I'm conflating the two, but so the general plan includes forecasts for growth, and those are sort of planned for. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
So when annexations happen, and development is taking place in areas that were formerly, parts of Fresno County. I guess I'm just not, I'm not understanding how approval for those developments can happen if the money to support services for the residents who eventually live there is not accounted for, maybe down to the penny, and not does the forecast cover that? Because if we're in this predicament now, it sort of says to me that it doesn't. What am I missing?
Yeah, I don't know that you're really missing anything. I think what we're seeing, at least from my perspective, is that there's a change in demand for services, and the state's revenue streams that we had counted on in the general plan haven't caught up or kept up with the cost of doing business and the realities of our community. So that has created a gap, whether it's a short-term gap where we're waiting for development to come online and pay for itself, or longer-term gaps that have been grown over time. Or, yeah, we do budget and we do our best to meet those needs, but it's not perfect. And growth has put pressure on the police department, but it also has brought more revenue to the community as a whole. But there's been a mismatch between what the state allows us to do via different revenue streams and the cost of doing business in California.
So are you saying that it's state policies that are to blame here, or is it something else?
I think it's a more complicated issue than just the state causing it. I think there are limitations in California on revenue growth that we are up against as a community. A city can't just raise its cost like any other business can. We have to go through pretty significant hurdles to increase any kind of revenue stream. And in addition, the cost of doing business in California has accelerated as well, which makes it harder for the chief to resource as he's facing larger fixed costs that weren't foreseen back in 2000 when that area was planned and built. So
should growth be limited, or should there be some constraints on growth, on real estate development, for example?
That's a big question for probably another time. Yeah.
Okay.
It kind of depends on where you sit.
All right. Well, thanks. This is a great crash course in city management. So thank you.
I'll just say that there's also limits on how much the city can limit growth under state law too. So, Greg?
Yeah, just real quick, and you pretty much answered my question with her, but between this session and what you're going to talk about next, can you identify for us what opportunities for this committee are, where we can request additional funding? What is legal for this committee to, if we decide, this many officers, where can we get that money? And if you could explain that in the next couple of meetings, that'd be appreciated.
All right. Anything else? Oh, and I think Stacy's been waiting. No,
Stacy Brinkley, and I'm just curious, you mentioned the 10% hotel tax.
Mhm.
Is that including our Airbnb businesses that are growing substantially in Clovis?
yes. Noah?
Just actually a quick follow-up based on what Rachel was asking. Are there plans currently to further annex additional land into Clovis?
I'll say yes, because there's demand for development in our community in areas that aren't within the city of Clovis currently, that are planned for development. So those are project focused and project driven. So when a developer comes in and says, I want to build 100 houses on property that's approved for that within the general plan, then your sphere, then an annexation can occur. Then they have to pay all those extra LMD, sorry, land safe maintenance district, community facility district, impact fees, all those things come on board with it. All right. Oh, and there was one online. Lauren?
I'll be super quick. So I'm just trying to figure out if there's a gap, right, in the needs that the police chief is saying that we need to run Clovis well. Is it just the way that is it the math involved? Like, where is that gap coming from? I can't piece that together.
So I think a good way to look at that is that city finances, and this is not unique to Clovis, have never really recovered from the Great Recession. So when the chief shows that he's kind of had a flat line of growth of officers, that's a direct, so you can almost look at our revenue streams as a city and show that growth has been limited, or our expenses have risen along with it at a faster pace than would be expected. So that's put a lot of pressure on cities across the state. You know, we go to conferences with our peers, and every city is dealing with it to a different degree as we are trying to figure out how to provide services while costs are accelerating and revenue streams are limited.
Absolutely. So I see so much detail going into all of our plans. Does it just mean that we need to reassess them more regularly to get more accurate, like, costs? I'm not sure. I'm just exploring, like, how can we fix this for the future? Like, sure, we can fix it with this committee, but are we going to deal with this again in another 6 years because we had a poor projection again? I don't know.
Yeah, so over the past several years, we've started updating our impact fees on an annual basis. And some of them are based on basically cost of living. Some are done based on full-fledged analysis to update those so that we can cover our costs going forward and trying to stay ahead of the curve so we don't get behind.
Thanks so much. This presentation's been great.
But those don't control kind of general fund revenues. You know, it's property tax and sales tax is based on how much you all spend on your homes and how much you spend at Costco. Greg?
Yeah, real quick, another quick question. So I know Chief had $385 per resident. Was that the average? But the impact fee is 200 and,
The impact fee
yeah.
for CFD? Yeah, so the impact fee, development impact fee was.
Oh, that's a one-time. That
Yeah.
covers, we'll call it 2 years of the chief's operating, you know, for one person. But what about the ongoing fees that you're allowed to charge for any house built after 2004?
Oh, I think I went too far.
And you said that those can go up annually. So how,
Yeah, I'm going to lean on Jay to talk about how CFD rates are changed. I believe they have a built-in COLA, and we can't really mess with that beyond that, from what I understand, but I want to make sure I'm not telling you something wrong.
So it was a year before I started, but basically those fees were set up so that when we grew to the east and to the south, that those areas were held at the city level of public safety. So where the county only has 2 firemen on the fire truck, City of Clovis residents have 3. So those fees were established to pay for those services. So those City of Clovis, those new folks have the same level of service that what the existing folks have. As you go farther from the city, you need more money to be able to service those areas. So that fee was established back then at that rate. But it's very rigid in how it can increase from there, and it can only go up by a set CPI. So if health insurance or benefits or anything else goes up for the police department or the fire department, that fee will could slip behind in those years. And you're seeing a little bit of that it was something done in 2004 and we're in 2022. Does that answer?
All right, so I don't see any more online, any in the room. All right. All right, so budget development. So we have all our land use, and then we get into basically our operations. Every year, we develop our annual budget, and it really starts with the 5-year forecast. So Jay and his team developed this document. It's going to go to council in early March. It usually does every year. And this document, which is online, it's on the CAC website as well, the current document, forecasts our expenses and revenues over a 5-year time period. It looks at our current year and what happened in the previous years. And this is a critical document for us to develop the budget because it tells us kind of where we're going and what we can afford going forward. That forecast is, and I threw a couple of screenshots in of some pretty detailed analysis that's done on forecasting those revenues I talked about and expenditures. It talks about how many positions we were going to hope to add in different departments. It goes into what we think the cost of living increases are going to be. It talks about what the retirement costs are going to be we get from our CalPERS, which is the California pension system. It goes into just a general CPI. So we plug all that in, and it's a big, giant assumption. If anyone has looked at financial assumptions, it's very similar to that, but it's very specific to the city. And every fund gets one, the general fund, the water fund, the sewer fund. We go through and analyze everything so that we can budget and resource appropriately. We even go into it kind of calculating how many housing units we think we're going to add, so we can look at how much revenue is going to come in over time. So based on that document, we then go into developing the actual budget. So one thing to take a step back on, and really the budget is a policy document. It's full of a whole bunch of numbers, but what it is what the city council is saying, this is what's important to our community, and this is what we're going to expend resources on in the next year. So think of it that way if you open up the budget document and read it. It's not necessarily just about numbers, but it's telling you what's important in the community. We refine those revenues and expenses from the 5-year, and then departments make final requests saying, we need this resource really bad. The chief would like to do a drone program, for instance. Can we add it in this year? And we assess to see if we can. Those are reviewed by the city manager, and for if we can afford it or not, whether it's a position. And then that document goes to council in May. They have a month for it to be reviewed by the public and council, and it's typically adopted in mid-June or so. Any amendments to that budget during the year have to be approved by council. It's a council action. And in that document, in every budget, we try to have reserves of 15 to 25%. So that's like having maybe 2 to 3 months of savings in your savings account in case of a rainy day. Debt for the city is only used for basically one-time costs. We don't finance operations with debt. It's bad practice. It's like living off your credit cards if you do. And we usually try to cover debt with fees or other revenue sources in order to cover debt. But debt is a tool that we use. And then we go through an annual audit process that's basically going through your financial statements. It's called the ACPR, the Annual Certified Financial Report, that usually goes in December to council. So it's audited by a third party every year. So that's the budget process, and probably one of the largest efforts that the city of Clovis staff and council team go through every year to establish our resources. So a quick overview on the budget. Total budget of $294 million. That is how much we're expending. This includes all those enterprise accounts, which is the lion's share of it. Public safety is 64 million of that, and general government is 8 million. I highlight those because those are mostly what general fund goes for. Revenues, you've seen this slide before. We have enterprise in yellow, and then all the small slices down below. I can get this, there we go. I would have been a terrible Jedi, apparently. All right, there we go. So yellow, that's the enterprise funds. Those are the funds that are really restricted, as well as grants, and then other revenues into sales tax, property taxes, and some other taxes are generally general fund. And then we have the internal service charges, which are funds mostly from these that are going into a department to provide services internally. So we have discretionary versus non-discretionary. You've seen this chart before as well. 76% is non-discretionary of the budget, and discretionary is the 24%. That's $66 million. So this shows the revenues. So this column is the one where council really has some discretion on how it's expended. And here's a chart showing the use of those discretionary revenues. This is all based on the current year budget. Pretty typical historically. So this slide also shows you non-discretionary revenues. All right. Public safety makes up 87%. General services, 3%. That funds things like the senior center, recreation, some other things. Administration and economic development, that funds me, so be nice. All right. Public utilities get some to take care of some of our parks. Planning and development services, they get a small amount to take care of kind of across the board city efforts, and the rest goes to public safety. That amount for police is almost $44 million. So there's not a whole lot here to work with relative to shifting things around from other departments when you're looking at public safety especially. All right. Are there any questions on those slides? And I'm going to turn it over to Shauna to talk about labor agreements. You know, I blew through a budget super fast, so. All right.
All right, good evening. It's on. Okay. I do oversee personnel risk management. In addition to that, the negotiations of all of our bargaining units. I'll give you an overview. We have some pretty strict laws and regulations when it comes to collective bargaining. So I can just kind of give you the highlights. Can't get into too much detail, but I think you'll get an idea. We have 8 bargaining units, and then we also have some non-represented folks in management and part-timers. And I use bargaining unit interchangeably with union, but basically we have 8 unions in the city. All of our contracts right now expire on June 30th of this year. We expect to be going into labor negotiations starting in March. And in preparation for that, one of the things that we do is we conduct a salary survey. We hire a consultant to analyze our 9 comparison cities. These 9 comparison cities we have used for 20 plus years. And just last year, though, we had that same salary survey person, company, take a look at whether or not these 9 cities were still valid comparison cities. Are they still a good example of cities that we should compare to? And when she's looking at that, what she's looking at is a whole host of things. First of all, she's looking at the services these other cities provide. Do they provide sewer and water and police and fire? A lot of cities will contract out for some of these. So we want to make sure we're finding cities that offer the similar services that we do. And she's also looking at the budgets of these cities. Do they have a similar size budget? Do they have a similar number of employees? And then, of course, she's looking at the community demographics. Are they in an area that has somewhat of a similar median household income? We can't compare, even if the population is the same, we can't compare it to a city in San Francisco. It's just not a good comparison city. So she looked at all of these different cities, looked at a few more new ones, and after meeting with all the bargaining units and evaluating the cities that she had recommended, we determined these 9 cities are still valid comparison cities. Those 9 cities are Chico, Davis, Lodi, Manteca, Merced, Redding, Roseville, Turlock, and Visalia. So those are the cities that we're utilizing. And then what she just is in the middle of completing right now, in fact, they went to the bargaining units and it should be finalized soon, is our actual salary survey. She takes every single job description that we have, every single title, and evaluates it against our 9 cities. But she doesn't look at just job titles. She looks at job descriptions. So she's reading hundreds of these job descriptions. and looking at the duties of what these people do. In addition, the minimum qualifications for these jobs. Does it require so many years of experience? Does it require a degree? And then she makes a chart that says, here's all of the requirements of this job and whether or not that's a compatible city that has a job that's close enough to the job that we do. In the case of police and fire, it's pretty easy to find comparables of police officer and a police officer. Some of the other jobs throughout the city, now mind you, we're doing this for every department. There's 650 folks that we're doing this analysis on. Some of them are not quite so cut and dried. My position oversees transit, senior center, rec, personnel risk management, facilities maintenance, and purchasing. There isn't another person in any of these 9 comparison cities that actually does all those things. So that happens a lot, that we don't have exact comparisons, or we don't have enough comparisons. To be statistically valid, we need 3. So we'll have some that we don't. But then what she does is she takes all of those cities, and then she pulls out a little bit of financing in there. So she makes a chart, and it says the top salary and the bottom salary of those positions. And we pay an extra, all of us employees, depending upon if you're safety or not, either an 8 or 8.4% additional amount to PERS that is really the employer's portion. But years ago, we gave everybody a raise of 8 or 8.4% over a few years. And then we pay an additional amount above the 8% we're already required to pay. So 16.4% of our salary goes straight to PERS. That is taken out because a lot of cities do this, but at different levels. Some are 2%, some are 3%, some are 4%. And she'll take that salary and average it out utilizing that additional percentage. So when you get to the end, you get an actual apples for apples. Yes, our salary may be higher, but if you're giving an extra 8.4% away, she's going to pull that out. So we have some good data. And then at the end, she'll give us a percent of every single position. Are they over the median, 50%, or are they below the median? And that's what we use to move forward to analyze which positions perhaps need an adjustment and also look at the entire market as a whole. Our next steps is we take that salary survey to the bargaining unit, let them see it, see if there's any corrections. Maybe there's something we missed. Maybe there's a position that she didn't look at that is a really good match. And they take a look at it, we take a look at it, and we wrap it up, which will happen very soon. Now, the city of Fresno is not a valid comparison city. It is 4 times our size. It has many more employees. However, we do pull the data for the city of Fresno just to take a look at it, so we have it for reference. But we don't use that in our salary comparisons because it is not a valid comparison city. And one of the problems, if you start doing that, is then people say, well, I want the county, I want Caltrans, and they start looking at these larger and larger agencies that really aren't a good comparison. We stick with our 9 salary comparison cities. And then coming up in March, the council will go to council and they will give us our authorization, and we'll start our bargaining with the hope that we'll get to a new contract before the old one expires. Any questions on that? Uh-oh. Greg has a question.
Just real quick, for those that don't know, can you explain PERS and what it is and why it's taken out?
Okay. PERS is Public Employee Retirement System. We don't pay into Social Security. We pay into this. Most of the government agencies in California, not all, some have their own, like City of Fresno has their own, pay into this statewide Public Employee Retirement System. I believe it's the largest in the country, right? Yeah. So it's its own entity, and each employee is required to pay a certain portion. And then we did this cost sharing measure, so we pay a little bit more into that, but that's our retirement plan. And there are 2 different levels. There are some changes that happened in 2013. We have classic members that were hired prior to January 1, 2013 that are on one scale. And then we have new members that were hired after January 1st, 2013 that are on a different scale for when they retire. It's done on a formulary about how many years you worked here, your age, and a percent. And they're different for classic than for new. We could for days talk about that.
You have a question online for
A
Karen?
question online.
Thank you for your presentation. I I have a question. When you're using this comparison cities for your salary survey, and you were describing, what factors you were looking into use these as your comparison cities, why aren't these same cities used for comparison when you were looking at the number of police officers per capita that was given in earlier in this presentation by city staff? Why weren't these same cities used? It seems like they're using two different sets of cities for comparison.
Well, I know Visalia was on there. Are the rest of them on there?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I think that was done based on the request from one of the members of the CAC based on population solely. We can come back with that.
Yeah, we can come back with the information. They were looking for, what was it, 30 above and 30 below in this chart. But if you want that information, we could get it for.
Yes, and I was the one that brought up that question at the last session. So yeah, I would like to look at, if you're using this as your comparison cities, I would like to see those numbers, the comparison cities be used across the board, just to give me an idea.
You bet. Yeah, we can get that information for you. Noah.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I apologize if you said this, but just looking at the difference in terms of where these cities are located. So when you guys look at this, is there accounting for like difference in cost of living?
Yes, yeah, there is an accounting for different costs of living. So we're trying, most of these you'll see are somewhere in the Central Valley. They're also most often adjacent to other communities that are larger like ours. So all of that is taken into account. We may have a similar population to, I don't know, Monterey. I don't know if we do or not, but if we did, that's not a valid comparison city. The cost of living there is so much higher that we just can't utilize that information. Any other questions? All right, back to Andy.
All right, so what I've learned is that we can't replace Shauna. Okay, so we've got 20 minutes until 8. We've committed to being done by then. There's 2 more slides. It's really 1. So and I'd like to present them, and maybe it's worth, we can come back and spend more time on them next week. So this is the historical review of the city of Clovis's police department funding going back from 2005-06 through 2019-20. And whoop, I hit the wrong button, sorry. It goes through every year. It goes through salaries based on the different bargaining units, overtime line items, benefits, services, materials, and supplies to total expenditures. The very top shows you total revenues of the general fund, not just at the police department. And then down below, it goes through some percentages of the different line items, and then the positions and their relation to population, and some CPI information is there. So we're not going to give it to you any bigger than what's on the slides printouts that you got. So we're going to send this out to you guys in a form that you can actually read. But for discussion purposes tonight, or just quick presentation, I didn't want to send this out and then have it be a kind of without any context. So this slide right here is basically that chart collapsed. And it starts in 2005-06, and the next column over for actuals is 1920. So you can see the average percent change per year of revenues is 3.7%. Discretionary was 4.2%, and non-discretionary is 1.5%. And that's of the general fund revenues, okay? And then it goes into the changes over that period on an annualized basis between the beginning and end of time. So police CPOA, which is the unionized portion of the police department, a 2.5% increase. Police non-CPOA, which is the non-Clovis police, basically non-sworn, is 10.3%. Public safety management, 6.8%, and it goes on down, as well as benefits, health, retirement, and other line items. We also have a percentages of total down here for you to review. So it's a negative 0.5% for salary overall relative to the proportions over that time period. PERS has gone up, which is the CalPERS, California Public Employees Retirement System, health, and then SMS. Over on the far side here is our sworn. So we went from 101 to 100, and we've grown some since then, but this is the data that we presented to council. We wanted to stay consistent with what we showed them. And then non-sworn has gone from 50 to 67. So it's at 2.3% increase annualized. And then population has gone from 89 to 119, so a 2% 3-year CPI there. And then the staffing per 1,000 residents went from 1.12 for sworn staff, that's an officer, to 0.84. And for non-sworn, went from 0.56 in state to 0.56. It kept pace with population for an overall 1.68 down to 1.4 for overall staff per 1,000 residents. So this chart has a lot of information on it, and probably you're gonna have a lot of questions. And we have some time for some of those questions tonight. We've got 10 minutes or so that we can go through some things. But I wanted to at least put it out there to allow you guys to start digesting it so that next week we can come back and spend some more time answering those questions and maybe going into some more detail. But are there any questions in general that would help you evaluate this information over the next few weeks? We can answer tonight, or of course, you can email us as well. Wow, okay. Okay, are there any other questions at all, either on the presentation or just of the process and how things are going?
Well, I just want to thank Jake Ulam. I just want to thank Greg for bringing up a point I was going to bring up, or a question I was going to ask, if we can add, agenda items in the future that focus on what methods and procedures are available to the city to procure more capital for Chief Fleming. Based on everything I've read and seen, it's not a question of if he needs more money, it's how do we get it for him. So I do look forward, I hope that we can get some of those things added to the agenda.
Yeah, so the questions you submit to us in between meetings do help us when we try to answer as many of those as we can, either written or through a presentation as well. So, all right, with that, I'll turn it back to the chair. Oh, one more.
I had a question. Initially, okay. Do I have to keep on holding?
You have to keep your thumb on it.
Okay. Initially, when I first heard the presentation with our police chief here, with the city council, there was one question one comment that one of the council members made that still bothers me, and it's somewhere with what we're saying here, is that she said, we allowed this to happen. And I took it as, we allowed this to happen, that they're underfunded. I couldn't understand, or I didn't know who was meant by we, and I don't quite understand what we did wrong to have allowed it to happen. So that still bothers me. I'm thinking she was talking about we're underfunded, with the police department. And what a follow-up question for me on that one, well, it's not a follow-up, this is a comment, but the follow-up question for me on that one was, why is the city of Clovis allowing city growth without providing adequate police protection funding? And not after. Let's not, it's like we're reacting to something already when we should have already prevented it before we allowed the growth in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah, I think your comments are 100% valid. Anything else, John or anybody else, Chief, at this time? Okay, thank you all members of the city very much for all your time, energy, and effort. We've been giving them a lot of questions, all of us. It shows that we're concerned citizens. We're really interested in our what we've been asked to provide here. I think it might have been a little overwhelming for our city staff to process all the different inquiries that have come from all of us. But keep them coming. They signed up. We're going to keep them coming if that's okay, John. Yeah, keep things going. And I'd like to at this time turn over to public comment. If we have any public comment out in the audience at this time. Go ahead, sir. Introduce your name, please.
Thank you. I'm Larry, Larry Fuentes. I'm a resident on Fowler and Nees. Okay, I recognize that we have one on January 7th. We have what do you call that? A DUI stop or DUI checkpoint. I noticed that it was undisclosed. Do we have any more? Do we have plans for more DUI checkpoints this year?
Chief, can you go ahead and address the question?
Yes, we do. You're putting me on the spot. We do. I think we have a grant to provide, I think it's 5 checkpoints throughout this coming year. We typically put those out in a news release prior to notifying the public that there will be a checkpoint. We don't disclose the location until obviously when we do it, and then after we'll put out a news release on what occurred and what location that was at.
All right, good enough. Thank you. Any other public comments? Follow-up question. Go ahead.
Yeah,
follow-up comment. I'm not sure.
Yeah, on the DUIs, I'm not seeing any DUI stops. How many DUIs have we got so far in Clovis this year?
This year, I couldn't answer it off the top of my head. I can find that out, but I know we did put out, I think it's on the CAC. Did we put out the crime stats for the year end? So if you go on the CIC's website for this committee, there's an end of year report for last year, and it'll have all the crime stats. The DUIs will be in there and have the total arrests for DUIs related to last year.
If you need some input as far as where to look that up at for all the different.
Thank you, boss.
Yeah, feel free to check up front for afterwards. Any other public comment? Yes, sir. Go ahead. Introduce your name, please.
Yes, my name's Brian Wilson. I'm a resident at 469 Bergen Avenue, Clovis. I'm concerned about our occupancy taxes. Not that it's not coming to the city, but and this was a great one because I had this question from last meeting you had. The increase in our occupancies have grown tremendously in Clovis with all the hotels that have been built. Out of these calls that you're showing here, which is huge, how many of those calls were handled by CSOs?
I could get that information as well to determine which ones would be that could potentially be handled by a CSO that were crimes that have occurred with no suspects. They're just going out and taking a report. If there is follow-up information with a possible suspect, then an officer would need to respond. I can tell you a lot of them have been, we found, like I mentioned, firearms-related manufacturing going on. Obviously, that's an officer call. Disturbances, it's going to be an officer call. We've had human trafficking occurring at the hotels. That's going to be related with an officer. Obviously, vehicle burglaries would be a CSO call that they can handle. Our CSOs only work day shift and swing shift hours. So anything that occurs after 10 o'clock till 6 in the morning is going to be handled by an officer, no matter what type of crime it is.
Okay, I have a follow-up too. That's not concerning to you that we went from 294 to 982 in roughly through 3 years?
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge concern. That's why I brought that up. I listed like 4 different locations within the city that are impacting our resources as they grow. The hospital is one that's a great asset to our community, but it impacts the police department heavily. Social Services, Department of Social Services is relocating all their facilities here to Clovis, and we don't really know what impacts that's going to have on our police department.
Okay, so let me just, I want to just follow up with this. With the occupancy tax, how much of the money, because I look at calls for service. That's what's impacting the department in this particular instance. How much revenue comes from those places come back to the department? Any?
Yeah, so the occupancy tax produces about 2.5 million into the general fund, and about 87% of the general fund revenue goes to public safety. About 45-ish% of that is for police.
Great comments. Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Any other public comments? Being no further business at this time, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.